you have a son, and you don't even know him. I never imagined that a single photo could unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. I wrote this story because it's real. Raw emotions, hidden truths, and the fight to protect the people who matter most. This isn't just fiction, it's a journey into the heart, where past mistakes collide with present desires, and every choice can change a life forever. Welcome back to Heartwoven Tales. I'm Selena. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Tell me, where are you listening to me from? I'd love to know. First of all, a very Merry Christmas to all my family, my wonderful listeners. Thank you for being part of this journey. I love you all so much. May your hearts be filled with love, your homes with warmth, and may every dream you hold dear come true. I have a special request before we dive in. Don't skip. Stay with me till the very end because every moment of this story is crafted to touch your heart. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so we can share more stories that speak to the soul. Now let's dive into today's tale. The grand hall shimmered under the glow of countless chandeliers, each crystal scattering light across the polished marble floors like fragments of frozen fire. Laughter and chatter swirled around Robert, a symphony of celebration that should have been uplifting, yet only pressed heavier on his chest. The air smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume, mingling with the subtle tang of fine wines, a scent that should have signaled joy, but instead felt suffocating. Guests moved gracefully, their smiles polished and rehearsed, their excitement tangible, yet every cheer and clink of glasses seemed to echo in a void within him. Robert's eyes scanned the crowd, catching glimpses of familiar faces, of people who had long since become distant figures in his carefully constructed world, their admiration and envy brushing past him like a soft but unwelcome wind. He held a glass of champagne loosely, the liquid shimmering like liquid gold, but his thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in memories that refused to remain buried. This engagement night was meant to mark a new beginning, a celebration of a life meticulously planned, alliances solidified, and appearances perfected. Yet beneath the polished smiles and orchestrated perfection, Robert felt the restless tug of something unfinished, something forbidden, a shadow lingering in the corner of his mind that he could neither chase away nor fully face. Every toast raised, every whispered compliment from a guest seemed to reverberate through him, stirring a quiet, aching emptiness that had been long ignored. He tried to anchor himself in the moment, to force a smile that would meet the expectations surrounding him, but the reflection in the crystal glasses betrayed the turmoil simmering beneath his calm exterior. It happened then, almost imperceptibly at first. A small envelope, pale and unassuming, appeared at his feet as though placed there by some invisible hand. He bent down, picking it up with fingers that felt suddenly heavy, the paper cool and smooth beneath his touch. There was no indication of who had sent it, no name or seal, only the quiet promise of revelation. As he slid the envelope open, a photograph fell into his hand, and the room seemed to shift around him, the laughter dimming into a background murmur, the sparkling chandeliers blurring at the edges. In the photograph, Mary sat on a sunlit bench, her smile serene yet tinged with a quiet strength he had long admired. Beside her, a small boy no older than 3 looked up at the camera, his wide eyes a mirror of Robert's own, holding a familiarity that struck him with the force of a thunderclap. Robert's heartbeat spiked, erratic and unsteady, the glass in his hand trembling ever so slightly as he brought the photo closer. His fiancée, standing elegantly at a distance, caught his gaze and tilted her head ever so subtly, an imperceptible warning glinting in her eyes. Her mother, poised and calm on the other side of the room, observed him with a faint, knowing smile, one that carried an unspoken threat beneath its gentleness. Both women seemed to radiate a silent caution, as if daring him to touch the past he had long tried to forget. Memories flooded him. Stolen moments in dimly lit rooms, whispered confessions, fleeting touches that had never been fully understood but had never left him either. Mary's voice echoed in his mind, soft and intimate, carrying warmth, longing, and unspoken promises he had once failed to keep. Max's innocent, trusting gaze from the photograph pierced deeper than Robert had expected, igniting a fire of longing and regret that churned in his chest like stormy seas. The boy's small hand rested on Mary's arm, and in that simple gesture, Robert felt the weight of lost time, of choices that had been made and consequences that could never be undone. He closed his eyes, briefly, trying to steady himself, but the memories refused to retreat. He saw Mary's laugh, the way her eyes had always searched for his in crowded rooms, the quiet intensity that had always set her apart. And now, seeing her with Max, he understood the depth of what he had missed, years of moments he would never get back, yet a present that demanded his attention, his care, and his heart. A tight knot formed in his stomach as he glanced up, the room's celebration continuing around him as though nothing had shifted. Yet for him, the world had tilted, an unseen axis dragging him toward a past he had no right to reclaim, yet could not ignore. His fiancée's delicate smile now felt brittle, an illusion held together by careful observation and social expectation. Her mother's eyes, sharp and calculating, followed his every subtle reaction, testing, measuring, ready to intervene should he stray too far from the script they had carefully written. Every instinct in Robert screamed to flee, to hide behind the armor of control he had spent years forging, yet something far stronger, the pull of the photograph, the gravity of memory, and the undeniable bond of blood, kept him rooted, caught between fear and desire. He returned his attention to the image of Max, tracing the boy's features with the tip of his finger, silently memorizing the curve of his cheeks, the gentle arch of his eyebrows, the way his eyes seemed to hold not just innocence, but the quiet strength inherited from both parents. Robert's mind raced, questions spilling over each other. How had she managed this all alone? Why had she kept him from knowing? And above all, why had he been absent when every heartbeat of hers had silently called for him? A shiver ran down his spine, equal parts anticipation and dread, as he realized that this photograph was not merely a memory, it was a summons to confront truths long buried, to navigate treacherous waters of love, guilt, and the fragile threads of trust. The laughter of the guests swelled, and a toast rang out near the front of the hall, but Robert hardly noticed. The sound felt distant, muffled, as though he were observing the celebration from underwater, separated from the joy of the evening by an invisible barrier of past regrets. He could sense Mary's presence in his mind, vivid and unyielding, her life interwoven with the boy's in ways he had only now begun to comprehend. Each second stretched unbearably, his pulse hammering in his temples, the photograph a beacon of all he had lost and all that could still be reclaimed. He felt the fragile thread of his composed exterior begin to fray, tiny fissures forming that threatened to reveal the raw storm of emotion he had long kept caged. He slipped the photograph back into the envelope, careful, almost reverent, yet even with it safely closed, its impact lingered. Thoughts collided in his mind, memories and regrets, jostling with the stark reality now staring him in the face. He remembered her laugh echoing through quiet streets, the warmth of her hand brushing against his, the silent promises made beneath dim streetlights. And now, seeing Max, those recollections were no longer just shadows of what once was. They demanded acknowledgement, action, and heart. The contrast between the glamorous celebration and the quiet devastation he felt within could not have been more acute, and yet he knew the night was far from over, that this small envelope had changed the course of everything. A subtle glance toward his fiancée revealed nothing overt, yet something in her posture, The slight tightening of her jaw suggested an awareness beyond casual observation, and her mother, always composed, now carried an unspoken challenge, as if daring him to step too close to the forbidden, to let the past reclaim its place in his life. Robert's thoughts flickered to danger. He'd always understood risk. But this was different. This was personal. It was emotional. It was raw, unfiltered, and unavoidable. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every heartbeat pulled him forward, deeper into the maze of feelings he had long thought dormant, yet which now blazed like wildfire across his chest. The room around him seemed to narrow, the lights dimming imperceptibly, leaving only the photograph, the laughter fading into murmurs, the weight of memory pressing against his ribs. The tiniest flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, a shadow crossing the floor, made him flinch, a reminder that even in celebration, he was not alone, that eyes watched, calculated, waited for the moment he might falter. He realized that this night, which had been planned as a pinnacle of triumph and joy, had transformed into a crucible, testing his resolve, his emotions, and the capacity of his heart to bear the collision of past and present. Every step he took toward composure felt precarious, as though the next breath could topple the carefully maintained balance of poise and restraint. Robert's fingers tightened around the glass in his hand, condensation beating along its surface, a tactile reminder of reality grounding him, even as thoughts threatened to spiral. His mind replayed fragments of moments with Mary, stolen smiles, hesitant touches, the unspoken understanding that had once existed between them. Those memories were now amplified, contrasted painfully against the present, reminding him of choices made, chances missed, and the unforeseen consequences that now confronted him. Each glance at the photograph deepened the ache, the longing, the undeniable pull of a life he had never truly left behind. And beneath it all, the pulse of fear lingered, the fear of loss, of confrontation, and of truths too long hidden. The champagne in his hand trembled, mirroring the uncertainty coursing through him, and for a fleeting moment, Robert felt the weight of indecision like a physical force pressing down. He had always been a man of control, of strategy, of calculated steps, but control now seemed almost irrelevant, meaningless in the face of what this envelope represented. Mary, Max, the memories and the ties that bound them, they were beyond schemes, beyond negotiation. They demanded recognition, demanded heart, demanded courage. The realization settled like ice in his veins. The night had shifted irreversibly. The engagement, the celebration, the carefully curated image of success, all of it now hovered on the edge of fracture, held together only by his ability to navigate the storm within. And then, as he finally set the envelope down on a nearby table, Robert felt a quiet but insistent tremor of anticipation threading through him. It was as though the photograph had not just revealed a truth, it had awakened a challenge, one that would test him emotionally, morally, and irrevocably. He sensed that tonight, nothing would remain the same. The chandeliers sparkled above, innocent in their beauty, unaware of the inner tempest, while the laughter and music swirled around him, a fragile shell of normalcy, hiding the tremors of revelation. He inhaled deeply, the scent of roses and wine mingling with the sharp tang of adrenaline and dread, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation with a past he could no longer ignore. Every instinct screamed that he should walk away, retreat into the safety of routine, and shield his heart from the storm that threatened to engulf him. Yet something far stronger, the pull of blood, love, and unfinished business, rooted him in place. He could feel it in his bones, in the rhythm of his heartbeat, in the tension threading through his muscles. This was no longer just a night of celebration. It was a night of reckoning, a night where hidden truths demanded to be faced, and where choices made in shadow would finally collide with the light. Robert's eyes drifted back to the photograph one last time, Max's small smile haunting him, a whisper of innocence that carried both accusation and hope. The night was far from over, and the first tremors of change had already begun to ripple through every carefully constructed layer of his life. 2. The envelope lay on the table, a quiet accusation in its stillness, while Robert's mind churned with fragments of memory and the unrelenting weight of what he now knew. The photograph of Max and Mary had been more than a revelation. It was a summons, a reminder of everything he had neglected and the life that had quietly flourished without him. Yet even as he traced the outline of the boy's face in his mind, he could feel the shadow of caution creeping in, an echo of the warning he had heard countless times before, a phrase that had lodged itself in his memory with unyielding precision. Do not revisit your past, or everything will fall apart. The words had been delivered calmly, almost gently, by his fiancée's mother during a dinner months ago, but their gravity had never left him. Now, in the quiet intensity of the engagement night, they felt like a prophecy, each syllable striking sharper and truer than ever before. Robert leaned back slightly, the chair beneath him solid and grounding, yet somehow insufficient against the turmoil within. He felt the room tilt, the air thick with both celebration and unspoken tension. The guests' laughter seemed muted now, an artificial curtain shielding the storm brewing inside him. Memories of Mary came unbidden, her quiet smile in dimly lit corners, the brush of her hand against his, the intimacy of moments shared in silence, where words had been unnecessary, yet deeply understood. Each memory was a flickering flame, simultaneously comforting and painful, illuminating both the love he had abandoned and the consequences of that choice. The photograph in the envelope was not just evidence of a hidden son. It was a mirror, reflecting the life he had missed, the warmth he had forsaken, and the innocence he had never been allowed to protect. His fiancée's mother's warning played like a refrain in his mind, each repetition tightening the knot of dread in his chest. She'd always been perceptive, calculating, a woman who understood the fragile architecture of relationships and the power of secrets. Robert now realized the depth of her influence, the subtle ways she had nudged, warned, and guided him without ever showing overt force. And yet, in the face of the photograph, the strategic warnings and whispered cautions seemed powerless, insignificant against the flood of raw emotion surging through him. He had been manipulated, yes, but he was also confronted by an undeniable truth, a reality he could no longer ignore. The presence of Max, of Mary, demanded action, demanded acknowledgement, demanded confrontation with a past that had long lingered in the shadows. The thought of Max brought a pang sharper than any he had expected. The boy's innocence, his tiny hands and trusting eyes, held an unspoken vulnerability that resonated deep within Robert. Each beat of the child's heart, each small gesture of his fleeting childhood was now a silent plea, a tether pulling Robert back into the world he had abandoned. He thought of the times he had left her alone, the nights he had missed, the moments of guidance, protection, and reassurance that had been his responsibility. Guilt rose in layers, suffocating in its intensity, wrapping tightly around his conscience, reminding him that his absence had been a choice with consequences he could never undo. And yet alongside the guilt, desire surged, an aching need to reclaim, to embrace, to protect, and to never let go again. As he considered the path before him, the subtle manipulations of his fiancée and her mother crystallized in his mind, the way they had orchestrated the engagement, the carefully curated smiles, the near imperceptible tests of loyalty and attention. All of it now seemed like a map laid out for him to follow, and the envelope, delivered in such a clandestine yet deliberate way, was the first trap, a spark meant to ignite something deeper. Yet Robert could not flee from it. could not retreat into the sanctuary of his usual control and detachment. The photograph had opened a door to truth, to the unspoken bonds of blood and love, and he was compelled forward, even as every instinct cautioned hesitation. The past was no longer a memory. It was a living, breathing force demanding recognition. His mind drifted to Mary herself, strong yet quietly wounded, a woman who had carried the weight of this secret alone for years. He imagined the sleepless nights, the quiet vigilance, the careful shielding of Max from the dangers of a world he had once inhabited. And now, seeing the boy, realizing the full scope of what had been hidden, Robert's chest tightened, a physical pressure that left him gasping for air in the midst of a celebration that refused to pause. The thought of her loneliness, her resilience, and her quiet endurance ignited both admiration and sorrow, mingling with the bitter realization that his absence had cost her far more than he could have anticipated. The past had left scars, some invisible, some painfully evident, and now he was forced to confront them all at once. Even as he wrestled with the swirl of emotion, a flicker of suspicion gnawed at the edges of his mind. The photograph had arrived under circumstances too precise to be accidental. His fiancée and her mother were not merely passive observers of his life. They were active participants, calculating, watching, and steering events to their advantage. Robert felt the familiar surge of caution that had always accompanied him in his dealings, the acute awareness of strategy and deception. Yet in this case, strategy alone could not guide him. Emotions, raw and unrestrained, had taken the lead. He realized that navigating this night would require more than wit or patience. It demanded courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront both the past and the present in their unvarnished forms. His heartbeat, irregular and insistent, seemed to echo the conflicting forces within him. Desire battled guilt, longing clashed with fear, and the pull of a future yet to be claimed tangled with the gravity of choices already made. Robert's gaze returned once more to the photograph, tracing Max's small features, memorizing every detail, as if by committing them to memory he could somehow atone for years of absence. The child's expression, tender and trusting, struck him with unexpected intensity, a reminder of the stakes that now lay before him. Every moment he had missed, every shared smile lost to time, converged in that small image, demanding recognition, accountability, and action. The whispers of the guests became a background hum, a distant tide washing over him as his mind spiraled through scenarios, regrets, and possibilities. He could almost hear Mary's voice in the silence, soft yet piercing, carrying questions unasked and truths unspoken. The weight of responsibility pressed down harder with each passing second. Robert could feel it in the tightening of his chest, the subtle trembling of his hands, the restless flutter of his pulse. The realization was undeniable. He could not ignore this, could not walk away, and could not pretend that the past had no claim on him. And yet, a sliver of dread lingered, the knowledge that stepping forward meant confronting forces far beyond the simple reclamation of love, forces that had been quietly shaping events while he remained unaware. He thought of the future, nebulous and uncertain, yet threaded with possibility. The path ahead was fraught with risk, tangled with emotions too deep to navigate with logic alone. Every instinct screamed caution, every memory whispered temptation, and the photograph rested between these forces like a silent fulcrum. Robert could feel the tension coiling in his shoulders, the subtle ache in his chest, a reminder that this night had irrevocably shifted from celebration to reckoning. He could no longer move through the motions of an engagement untouched by the past. The photograph had shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy, leaving only the raw, exposed landscape of truth and feeling. And as he finally straightened, drawing a slow, measured breath, Robert knew that this was only the beginning. The night, the envelope, the photograph, all of it demanded engagement, confrontation, and courage. His fiancée and her mother watched him, silent yet insistent, as if aware that the first tremors of recognition had already begun to ripple through him. Every glance, every heartbeat, every flicker of thought now carried weight, carrying him forward toward a path he had long avoided but could no longer ignore. The collision of fear, longing, and responsibility tightened in his chest like a vice, yet beneath it all a spark of determination glimmered, fragile but unyielding. He would not turn away, he would not falter, and he would not allow the past to remain buried any longer. 3. The moment Robert stepped closer, the air seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that neither celebration nor careful planning could dispel. Mary stood across the room, composed yet alert, her posture radiating strength, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotion that had been hidden for years. The light caught the delicate curve of her jaw, the subtle tightening of her shoulders, and the faint tremor in her hands, and Robert noticed it all with the precision born of a man who had once known her inside and out. Every instinct in him screamed caution, yet every heartbeat urged him closer, drawn irresistibly toward the woman who'd been a part of him long before the photograph forced him to confront reality. Mary's eyes locked on his, wide, searching, and uncertain, and in that silent exchange, decades of unspoken words seemed to hang between them. For a moment, the room around them dissolved. Guests, laughter, chandeliers, and music melted into a blurred backdrop, leaving only two hearts beating against the weight of past choices. She had never told him about Max, never shared the boy's existence, never revealed the tiny life that had grown from their fleeting love into a quiet, enduring presence. Her silence had been a shield, protecting both of them from dangers Robert could not fully comprehend, from consequences he had never imagined, and from enemies that had lurked in shadows long before the engagement night had begun. Max, perched on a small armchair nearby, tilted his head as if sensing a strange familiarity in Robert's gaze. His tiny hands fidgeted with the edge of a blanket, and his wide eyes, so innocent and unassuming, flickered between curiosity and caution. He did not yet understand why the man before him held a weighty presence, why his gaze seemed at once protective, familiar, and achingly tender. Robert observed him closely, noting every small gesture, the way Max's fingers clutched the blanket, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, the way his tiny frame seemed poised between trust and hesitation. The boy's presence was a living reminder of years lost, of moments he could never reclaim, and yet the urgency to embrace and safeguard this innocent life surged through him with unparalleled intensity. Mary stood like a fortress, shoulders squared and chin lifted, but Robert could see the fissures beneath the surface. Every inch of her projected composure, yet her eyes betrayed the inner battle between love and fear, hope and caution. He remembered the countless nights she had endured alone, raising Max in a world fraught with danger he had once ruled, protecting the boy from the shadows of his own past. And now, standing before her, Robert felt a blend of awe and regret, so intense it left him breathless. He had returned too late for some things, yet still in time for others, and the balance between what was lost and what could be reclaimed trembled in fragile equilibrium before him. The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the faint rustle of Max shifting in his seat. Robert finally spoke, his voice low, roughened by emotion. "Mary." The single word carried the weight of years, of longing, of remorse, and of hope, and it seemed to hang in the air, heavy with consequence. Mary's lips parted slightly, her expression guarded, yet vulnerability flickered in her eyes. She spoke softly, a whisper more powerful than a shout. "Even while apart, I felt your absence." Those words, laden with unspoken truths and memories, struck him like lightning, illuminating the depth of her endurance, the complexity of her feelings, and the reality of the life she had carved out without him. Robert's gaze shifted to Max, and in that instant, all defenses he had carefully constructed melted away. The boy's innocence, trust, and subtle recognition disarmed him completely. Every memory of their past, the stolen touches, the shared laughter, the quiet confessions, flooded his mind in vivid, unrelenting waves. The room seemed to narrow, the sounds of celebration fading into a muffled hum, leaving only the three of them suspended in a bubble of unspoken understanding. Robert's chest tightened with a mixture of regret and yearning, and he realized that protecting Mary and Max was no longer optional. It was the singular purpose that now governed every thought, every pulse of his being. Mary's eyes studied him carefully, measuring, weighing, and calculating the truth that lingered in his expression. She had learned to shield her heart, to protect Max from forces he could not yet understand, and to navigate a world that demanded vigilance and foresight. Yet in this fleeting moment she allowed herself a crack, a glimpse of the emotions she had harbored in secret: love, fear, and an ache of longing that mirrored his own. Robert stepped closer, the sound of his movements muted against the background music, each step deliberate, as though he were approaching a fragile monument of trust that had been built in his absence. Max shifted again, sensing tension he could not articulate, his small fingers curling tighter around the blanket. Robert knelt slightly, bringing himself to the boy's level, and whispered, barely above a breath, "I'm here now, Max. I won't leave again." The words, though simple, carried a weight beyond measure, a promise he had not dared make before, yet one he now intended to keep at any cost. Max's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition and curiosity breaking through his initial reserve. The fragile bond began to form, not through grand declarations, but through quiet acknowledgement, presence, and the unspoken understanding that Robert would fight for him, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Mary exhaled softly, a subtle release of tension, yet her expression remained vigilant. The layers of fear, love, and cautious hope intermingled, forming a complex emotional tapestry that spoke louder than any words could. Robert's gaze held hers steadily, searching for clues, seeking reassurance, and silently begging for forgiveness for his absence. Their shared past, the stolen moments that had defined their connection, and the fragile present all converged in this suspended instant, a perfect storm of emotion, history, and unspoken longing. The room around them seemed to fade further, the voices of guests and the sparkle of chandeliers transforming into a distant haze. Only the three of them existed in this moment, a triangle of past choices, present consequences, and future possibilities. Robert's heart pounded with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation, each beat reminding him of what had been lost, what could still be saved, and the high stakes of the decisions now before him. Every subtle movement, the tilt of Mary's head, the flicker of Max's gaze, the tightening of his own fists, added layers of tension, anticipation, and raw human vulnerability to the unfolding scene. The emotional gravity of the situation pressed down on him relentlessly. Robert's mind raced with questions, regrets, and strategies all at once, yet beneath the chaos of thought, clarity began to emerge. He understood now that no manipulation, no scheming, and no external force could alter the bond between him, Mary, and Max. It was a force far deeper than circumstance, a tether woven from shared history, blood, and enduring love. And though fear and uncertainty lingered like shadows at the edges of his consciousness, a singular determination crystallized. He would protect them, cherish them, and reclaim the place in their lives that had always been his, no matter the cost. Even as he straightened, his gaze never leaving Mary's, Robert felt the stirrings of hope and apprehension entwined like ivy around his heart. This night, which had begun as a carefully orchestrated celebration, had transformed into the first decisive moment of reckoning, a moment where past choices, hidden truths, and unspoken emotions collided with raw intensity. Every second stretched with potential, every glance carried weight, and every breath seemed laden with the promise of transformation. The journey ahead would not be easy. It would demand courage, patience, and emotional reckoning. Yet for the first time in years, Robert felt fully awake to what truly mattered. And in that awakening, he sensed that the path forward, though fraught with peril and uncertainty, was undeniably worth every risk. The engagement hall, once a sanctuary of celebration, now felt like a carefully constructed stage, its glamour a fragile mask hiding the complex web of intentions and emotions entangling everyone present. Robert's gaze wandered, not with interest in the decorations or the applause of the crowd, but because of the sharp awareness that those closest to him were watching, measuring, calculating. His fiancée's mother, standing with her hands clasped in front of her, observed every subtle movement, every flicker of expression. There was a faint tension in her jaw, the curl of a finger, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes, silent signals, warnings wrapped in civility. She had always known how to wield influence like a blade, invisible yet dangerously precise, and tonight was no different. His fiancée, radiant in her gown, approached him with an effortless smile that carried the veneer of warmth. But behind the practiced elegance, suspicion simmered. She had sensed his mind drifting, glimpses of past emotions reflected in his eyes, and her instincts, honed by years of social maneuvering, had read the truth with unsettling clarity. Their gazes met briefly, polite, restrained, but the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. She was no stranger to deception and manipulation, yet she had underestimated the depth of the bond that tied Robert to Mary and Max, a bond stronger than strategy, stronger than fear, stronger than appearances. Robert, meanwhile, felt the weight of the room pressing on him. The laughter and music, once comforting in their familiarity, now felt intrusive, a constant reminder of the delicate balance he had to maintain. Each flash of movement, each whispered conversation seemed to ricochet in his mind, drawing him back to memories of Mary. He remembered the softness of her hand, the subtle inflections in her voice, the quiet strength she had always exuded, even in the most perilous moments. Those memories had once been fleeting moments of solace. Now they were anchors, tying him irrevocably to the life he had left behind, but could never abandon. Every glance in the room now carried significance. Robert noticed the slight twitch in his fiancée's fingers, the way her eyes darted toward his whenever he lingered on Mary for more than a heartbeat. Her mother, always calculating, subtly shifted closer, her posture betraying anticipation, a quiet hunger to assert control over the situation. Yet despite their vigilance, Robert's attention remained locked on Mary and Max. Every touch, every fleeting look exchanged between him and Mary was laden with history, desire, and an unspoken understanding that defied the social conventions surrounding them. The room, for all its opulence, had shrunk into a crucible, where emotions and strategy collided in every heartbeat. Flashbacks surged unbidden, each one sharp and vivid, each memory igniting longing and regret with equal intensity. Robert saw Mary in quiet moments, her laughter echoing down narrow streets, the warmth of her gaze in dimly lit rooms, the subtle expressions that spoke of love he had once failed to recognize. Max, even in memory, was a living reminder of time lost and choices deferred, his small hand reaching for a world that had never fully known his father. The collision of past and present left Robert breathless, each memory another thread in the tangled web of relationships he now had to navigate. The subtle power plays of his fiancée and her mother became almost unbearable in their intensity. Robert could feel the invisible pressure, the manipulation carefully layered into polite words, the hidden intentions behind each courteous gesture. Yet as much as he tried to read them, to anticipate their next move, he realized that his heart was no longer his own. It beat solely for Mary and Max, the only constants in a room of shifting loyalties and veiled threats. Every smile he returned, every polite nod he offered, had to be measured, calculated. Yet the true truth, the yearning, the guilt, the love, could not be concealed. Max, meanwhile, remained a quiet observer, his innocent presence a grounding force amidst the swirling tension. The boy's small, trusting smile occasionally lifted the fog of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm Robert. That smile carried the weight of everything he could lose and everything worth fighting for. It reminded him that despite the schemes, the manipulations, and the social pressures surrounding him, the stakes were simple and pure. The safety and happiness of the two lives that had unknowingly become his entire world. In that moment, Robert's resolve hardened, even as every muscle in his body remained tense with anticipation, every nerve alert to the next move in a subtle war being waged around him. Mary projected strength, yet the tension in her shoulders betrayed the careful control she exerted over her own emotions. She sensed the scrutiny of his fiancée and her mother, and she navigated it with poise, each gesture deliberate, each expression a mask of calm vigilance. But Robert saw through it. The faint quiver in her hand, the way her gaze softened when it flicked toward Max, the way her chest rose slightly with restrained emotion. He understood her unspoken code: protect the boy, shield him from exposure, and never allow the past to compromise the fragile stability they had built. Yet tonight, stability was a fragile illusion, threatened by secrets now surfacing, and the room itself seemed a battlefield where every glance, every smile, every gesture could tilt the balance. The engagement's glittering veneer began to fracture under the weight of their interactions. Each subtle touch between Robert and Mary, a hand brushing against an arm, a fleeting glance lingering longer than politeness allowed, was noticed by others, though misinterpreted or ignored in the surface-level politeness of the event. Yet Robert felt every second, every heartbeat, as if amplified. The room's opulence and cheer could not mask the intensity of emotions thrumming beneath the surface. Every look he exchanged with Mary carried a language beyond words, a communication of regret, desire, and unspoken promises that defied the manipulations surrounding them. A shiver of unease ran through him as he realized the fiancée and her mother's scheme might already be unraveling. Their control, so meticulously maintained, could not account for the raw, undeniable bond that now governed his heart. He understood that a single misstep, a glance too long, a word too soft, a hesitation, could tip the scales, revealing truths they had worked so carefully to conceal. Each movement, each gesture, each expression became a potential point of exposure, a potential spark igniting the fragile web of deception around him. And yet, despite the danger, his focus remained unshakable. His eyes, heart, and mind were fully devoted to Mary and Max. Time seemed to dilate around them. The laughter of guests, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of music became a distant hum, barely audible against the vivid reality of the emotions pulsating in the space between Robert, Mary, and Max. Every unspoken word, every deliberate pause, every flicker of acknowledgement added layers to the intricate web of relationships around him. Robert felt the fragile balance between love, loyalty, and manipulation tightening with each passing moment. One false move, one poorly timed gesture, and the carefully maintained facades could collapse, leaving only raw, unfiltered truth exposed. The tension coiled inside Robert like a spring, ready to release with unpredictable force. He observed his fiancée's subtle gestures, the almost imperceptible attempts to redirect attention, and her mother's measured, calculating glances. He knew they were strategizing even now, adapting to the unspoken emotional currents flowing through the room. Yet he also knew that their tactics were powerless against the bond that had survived absence, distance, and secrecy. His heart beat faster, a combination of anticipation, fear, and determination driving him forward, even as every step felt precarious on the knife edge of revelation. Max's presence, small and unassuming, became the fulcrum of all Robert's choices. The boy's innocence, his quiet trust, and his subtle cues of recognition amplified the stakes of every interaction. Robert realized that this night was no longer just about appearances, alliances, or strategy. It was about the survival of love, truth, and connection amid a carefully woven tapestry of manipulation. Each subtle shift in posture, each fleeting glance, each whispered memory carried potential consequences of profound magnitude. And as the evening stretched onward, Robert understood that he had entered a delicate labyrinth, where every decision could either protect or destroy the fragile bonds that now defined his life. In that suspended moment, a single misstep could shatter everything, yet inaction was equally dangerous. Robert's focus narrowed, every thought and motion meticulously weighed, yet the emotional gravity of Mary and Max was inescapable. The web of relationships around him, fiancé, her mother, past love, and innocent child, had become a living, breathing entity, intricate, dangerous, and beautiful. He could feel its tension pressing into him, shaping him, challenging him, demanding the best and truest version of himself. Every pulse of his heart, every inhalation of the room's perfumed air, every flicker of observation was a thread in a fragile, high-stakes weave, one that required courage, precision, and unwavering devotion to navigate successfully. The moment Robert stepped closer to Max, the air seemed to thrum with unspoken tension, a delicate mix of anticipation, fear, and hope. The boy, no older than 3, sat perched on a small chair, his legs swinging slightly as he observed Robert with cautious curiosity. There was a wariness in his eyes, a hesitation born of a lifetime spent in a world where trust had been fragile and fleeting. Robert knelt slowly, careful not to startle him, letting his presence settle like a gentle weight rather than an intrusion. Every micro-expression on Max's small face, the tilt of his head, the furrow of his brow, the fleeting flicker of recognition, carried meaning Robert tried to decipher, a language of innocence that demanded patience and empathy. Max's gaze darted to Mary repeatedly, seeking reassurance, testing boundaries, and silently questioning the intentions of this man who seemed both unfamiliar and intimately known. Robert noticed every detail, the subtle tension in Max's shoulders, the way his fingers toyed with the hem of his shirt, the minute hesitation before he offered even a tentative glance toward him. In that instant, Robert understood the fragility of trust, the care required to nurture it, and the enormity of the responsibility he now bore. One wrong move, one misplaced word, could shatter the fragile foundation of connection that he desperately needed to build. Mary watched from a short distance, her posture a mixture of vigilance and tentative relief. Her eyes never left Max, yet they flickered toward Robert frequently, assessing his actions, gauging his intentions, and silently wondering if he could be trusted to navigate the complexities of their intertwined lives. She had raised Max alone, instilling strength, resilience, and a cautious sense of understanding of the dangers surrounding them. Robert had never been part of that process, and now he was thrust into the delicate balance of earning trust, proving his presence was a source of safety rather than risk. Her expression was a tightrope of emotions, fear, relief, longing, and a tentative hope that perhaps the past could be reconciled with the present. Robert extended a hand slowly, giving Max the time to retreat if he wished. The boy did not move away, only tilted his head slightly, studying Robert with careful curiosity. Robert's voice, gentle and steady, broke the silence. "I'm here for you, Max. I won't leave again." The words were deliberate, infused with promise, regret, and an unwavering determination to be present in a way he had failed to be before. Max's small fingers twitched, as though he understood the weight behind the words, though comprehension at his age was limited. The subtle recognition in his eyes was enough to kindle a fragile spark of connection, a tiny lifeline bridging the years Robert had been absent. Mary exhaled quietly, relief brushing against fear in a conflict that made her chest ache. She had spent years protecting Max from threats she knew he could not yet understand, ensuring he felt loved, safe, and unconditionally cared for. And now, standing before her, Robert had to prove that he could not only recognize the fragility of trust, but honor it with every gesture, every word, every choice. It was not enough to feel love. It had to be demonstrated consistently, tangibly, without faltering. The smallest misstep could unravel months of careful emotional construction, and she could not allow Max to be hurt again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Robert lifted Max into his arms. The boy's initial tension did not vanish, but it softened in response to the security radiating from Robert. Each breath, each heartbeat became a shared rhythm, an unspoken communication of safety, care, and growing trust. Robert whispered gently, "I'm here, Max. I will protect you." The words seemed to settle over the boy like a protective cloak, a reassurance that went beyond language, touching the core of his developing understanding of love and security. Max's tiny arms reached tentatively around Robert's neck, a gesture of trust that, while tentative, carried immense significance. Robert's own defenses melted as he held Max close. Every memory of absence, every pang of regret, every lost opportunity surged through him with stark intensity. He realized that the past could no longer define him. The present demanded full engagement, responsibility, and devotion. His heart beat with a mixture of desire to protect, guilt for past neglect, and an overwhelming, almost painful love that demanded action. Each second stretched endlessly, a slow-motion cascade of realization and purpose that left him simultaneously breathless and resolute. Mary observed silently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had fought so hard to shield her son from disappointment, from men who came and went, and from a world that often rewarded absence with apathy. Now, watching Robert cradle Max, she felt a precarious sense of hope that perhaps he could be trusted, that perhaps the bond they had once shared could be rekindled and reinforced in a way that allowed all three of them to thrive. Yet a flicker of fear remained. Trust had to be earned. Patience had to be cultivated, and one wrong step could undo everything. Her hands clenched briefly at her sides, a small, almost imperceptible reaction to the uncertainty of what was unfolding. Robert lowered his voice further, speaking directly to Mary now, his eyes never leaving hers. "Without you, my life was incomplete," he confessed, each word deliberate, each syllable weighted with the depth of years lost and the longing of the present. Mary's gaze softened, the stern vigilance yielding to vulnerability for a fleeting, fragile instant. "And without you, mine too," she replied, her voice carrying equal parts strength and fragile hope, the acknowledgement of shared regret and rekindled desire threading between them. The words, simple yet profound, built a bridge across years of separation, a bridge strengthened by the silent presence of Max, whose small, trusting smile now sealed the connection between them. The bond between Robert, Mary, and Max crystallized in that moment. It was not instantaneous or effortless. It was fragile, built on the recognition of past mistakes, the acknowledgement of pain, and the careful layering of trust. Robert understood with every fiber of his being that this trio's survival, emotional, physical, and relational, depended on the unwavering commitment he would bring from this night onward. Every gesture, every whispered word, every act of protection would matter, and every lapse could unravel the delicate thread they were beginning to weave. Max's innocent smile, radiant and pure, was a beacon in the storm of complex emotions. It reminded Robert that love, when patient and tender, could overcome years of absence, fear, and unspoken questions. The boy's small acceptance, though tentative, was an invitation to prove himself worthy, to show through actions that his presence would mean protection, care, and unwavering support. The realization struck Robert like a lightning bolt. This was no longer merely about him and Mary. It was about the life they now shared, the safety and growth of a child who had silently shaped their hearts without either fully realizing it. As the evening stretched on, Robert remained close, speaking softly, holding Max's small hands and offering subtle reassurances with each touch. Every glance exchanged with Mary carried unspoken understanding, patience, vigilance, and love intertwined in a delicate, invisible thread. The stakes were impossibly high, yet the potential for a bond stronger than fear or manipulation filled the space around them with a fragile, shimmering hope. He understood that trust was earned, love demonstrated, and presence maintained consistently. This was the beginning, fragile yet resolute, of a journey where their emotional connection would define their strength and resilience. Even amidst the opulence and orchestrated celebration, Robert felt the gravity of what had shifted. The room, the chandeliers, the polite laughter, all became background noise to the profound intimacy unfolding between the three of them. A single glance from Max could anchor his heart, a soft sigh from Mary could steady his resolve, and the faintest flicker of recognition in the boy's eyes could ignite the full force of protective determination within him. Every heartbeat, every gesture, every whispered word now mattered more than it ever had before. And as Robert held Max gently in his arms, a slow, deliberate promise solidified in his mind. No past mistake would define the future, no absence would diminish the bond, and no threat, external or internal, would shake his commitment. The journey ahead would test patience, trust, and love at every turn, yet in this suspended, fragile, and emotionally charged moment, a foundation was laid, a foundation of presence, devotion, and unyielding care that would guide all of them through the trials yet to come. The weight of revelation hung in the air like a storm that had finally broken. Robert's chest heaved with a mixture of relief, anger, and determination, and every nerve in his body screamed for resolution. The room around them, the remnants of the engagement celebration, the glittering chandeliers, and the polite murmur of guests, felt suddenly distant, irrelevant against the intensity of the confrontation at hand. His fiancée and her mother, poised in their usual composure, now faced the undeniable truth, the meticulously hidden manipulations laid bare under the piercing clarity of Robert's gaze. Their masks of civility trembled at the edges, and the careful veneer of control cracked in real time. Robert took a step forward, his voice low, steady, yet laced with the force of emotion he could no longer suppress. "I know everything," he said, eyes locking with his fiancée's mother first, then meeting his fiancée's carefully maintained facade. Every word cut through layers of deception like a sharpened blade, unmasking the manipulation that had been hidden behind smiles, gestures, and seemingly innocent orchestrations. The room seemed to hold its breath, as though the very air recognized the gravity of the moment, the irrevocable pivot point where choice, truth, and justice collided. Tears welled in Mary's eyes, shimmering like fragile glass under the warm light. She had carried the truth in her heart, weighed it against the need for caution. And now, standing beside Robert, she could release the burden she had borne alone for so long. Her emotions were a tangled storm of relief, validation, and a slow, dawning hope. Max, sensing the shift in tension, let out a small, joyous laugh, the sound innocent and pure, cutting through the lingering weight of anxiety like sunlight through clouds. That laughter, simple and unaffected, tethered Robert's soul to the present, grounding him in the reality of what mattered most. Every thought of past regret, every moment of longing, now crystallized into a clear, unyielding purpose. Robert moved closer to Mary, taking her hands in his, feeling the warmth, the subtle tremors of vulnerability, and the silent strength she had cultivated over the years. He saw the shadows of fear and caution still lingering in her eyes, but he also saw trust, the fragile, tentative trust that had survived absence, distance, and secrets. "Mary," he whispered, voice low but filled with finality, "I live only for you, only for Max. Everything else is meaningless if it's not with you." Her eyes glistened, tears mingling with a small, hesitant smile, and she finally allowed herself to lean closer, trusting the sincerity in his words, the depth of emotion in his gaze. Every past wrong, every missed opportunity, every heartbeat lost in separation now formed the foundation of a bond that could withstand any storm. Max, perched between them or leaning into Robert's side, radiated innocence and trust, reinforcing the emotional connection that had been tested and proven resilient. The boy's small hands reached out to both of them, bridging past mistakes with the present, cementing a triad of love, security, and hope. Robert turned to the room, to the guests and witnesses of the engagement, his voice firm and resolute. "This engagement ends tonight," he announced, each word deliberate, unyielding and imbued with the weight of truth. Not because of pride, not because of anger, but because honesty, love, and trust come before appearances and schemes. Everything else is secondary. There was a collective intake of breath, the careful whispers of intrigue and surprise filling the space. Yet Robert's focus remained unwavering, anchored to Mary and Max. Mary stepped closer, her hand brushing against his, and he felt the warmth of shared understanding, the quiet electricity of a bond reaffirmed. The room, in its ornate grandeur, faded further into the background, leaving only the three of them suspended in a fragile, luminous sphere of emotion. Every glance exchanged carried unspoken promises. Every subtle touch reinforced safety and trust, and every shared breath sealed the new beginning they were claiming together. No longer bound by manipulation, secrecy, or fear, they were free to cultivate a life defined by authenticity, devotion, and shared responsibility. The mother and fiancé, stripped of influence, could only retreat into the shadows of their failed scheme. The carefully orchestrated plan, built on control and deception, crumbled under the force of genuine connection and truth. Robert understood, fully and without doubt, that external attempts to manipulate or dominate their lives were powerless against the foundation of love, trust, and presence they had now constructed. Their defeat was quiet, inevitable, and almost poetic, their influence nullified not by confrontation, but by unwavering authenticity and the undeniable force of relational bonds built on experience, care, and enduring emotion. Mary and Robert finally embraced, fully, openly, and without hesitation. Their hearts, previously guarded and tentative, now beat in alignment, synchronized in rhythm, and flowing with a shared understanding that transcended words. Max nestled into the space between them, a living symbol of the life they were choosing to nurture, protect, and celebrate together. The room, the night, and even the past seemed to bend around the gravity of their decision, acknowledging that a true beginning, unencumbered by artifice, had been forged in its most raw and human form. In the hours that followed, as the engagement hall emptied and the echoes of celebration faded, the three of them remained together, a small, inseparable unit bound by trials, trust, and the rekindling of love. Every glance, every word, every touch was deliberate, tender, and laden with significance. Robert watched Mary as she moved with Max, noting the delicate interplay of caution, strength, and care that defined her interactions with their child. He understood that the future was not free from challenge, but that the foundation they now shared, built on presence, truth, and mutual devotion, was unshakable. Even as the city lights glimmered beyond the windows and the cold night whispered through the hall, warmth radiated from within. Robert, Mary, and Max had claimed a life no scheme, secret, or manipulation could undermine. Their shared laughter, the gentle rhythm of Max's small footsteps, and the quiet understanding in every glance created a tapestry of love and trust, fragile yet invincible, that would sustain them through any storm. Each moment was now precious, each interaction layered with meaning, and each heartbeat a reaffirmation of the life they had fought to reclaim and redefine. The story of betrayal, manipulation, and secrecy had reached its final crescendo, replaced by the quiet, powerful triumph of connection, honesty, and enduring affection. Robert, looking at Mary and Max, felt a clarity he had not known in years. The past could not define them, the schemes of others could not bind them, and the future, now firmly in their hands, belonged solely to the love, trust, and devotion they had chosen together. Every lingering fear dissolved into the strength of their bond, every shadow of past absence illuminated by presence, and every whispered regret transformed into deliberate action and shared joy. In this new beginning, life became a series of intentional, cherished moments. Each glance, each shared smile, each quiet conversation reinforced the foundation of trust they had built. Max thrived, exploring the world with confidence and joy, enveloped in the unwavering care of both parents. Mary and Robert, once fractured by distance, secrecy, and manipulation, now moved together as a single entity, each step forward deliberate, each choice a commitment to love, protection, and mutual respect. The lessons of the past, pain, regret, fear, were no longer shackles but guides, shaping them into stronger, more attuned guardians of their shared life. The future, once uncertain and shadowed by deceit, now stretched before them, luminous and full of possibility. Their bond, tested by absence, betrayal, and manipulation, had emerged stronger, tempered by trials, and anchored by love. Robert's heart, once heavy with regret and longing, now beat with certainty, devotion, and the quiet satisfaction of redemption. Mary's strength, tempered by vulnerability and care, complemented his own, and Max, the living embodiment of their shared resilience, completed the circle of love they had fought to protect. As night gave way to dawn, the first light brushing through the windows, a sense of completion settled over them. They had faced fear, betrayal, and manipulation and emerged unbroken, bound by a love that was deliberate, conscious, and resilient. Every hug, every whispered promise, every shared laugh was a testament to their survival, growth, and the conscious choice to build a life together unencumbered by the past. And in that calm, radiant morning, Robert, Mary, and Max stepped forward into a future that was fully theirs, defined not by schemes, not by manipulation, but by trust, passion, and the unwavering strength of hearts finally, wholly aligned. And that's the end of today's story here on Heartwoven Tales. I hope it touched your heart, stirred your emotions, and reminded you of the power of love, trust, and truth. Thank you so much for listening, for being part of our family, and for letting me share these tales with you. May your hearts always be full, your relationships strong, and may you find courage to face your own truths. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world and keeps these stories alive. And remember, every story here is for you. Every word from me is for you. And together we celebrate love, life, and hope. Until next time, this is Selena, sending you love, warmth, and a little magic from my heart to yours. Stay safe, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of stories.